Good afternoon, Newcastle. Malala. Malala, you've all heard of Malala. When her story is told, and when we hear of her work, a really important detail is curiously omitted. Malala, she was on her way to school, wasn't she, when she was famously shot by the Taliban. I bet most of you think the school she was going to was a government school, a public school, as people say internationally. It was not. It was a low-cost private school, a private school charging a couple of US dollars equivalent per month. It was set up by her father, and her father eventually became the president of an association of 400 low-cost private schools in the Swat Valley in Pakistan. And I first discovered this phenomenon, this extraordinary phenomenon of low-cost private schools 15 years ago when I was in Hyderabad, a city in south-central India. I was there, as Herb said, I was well known for private education. I was an expert on private education, but I was there raising funds for elite private schools, the Indian School of Business, IIIT. These were the schools that I was raising money for, and I felt dissatisfied because for whatever reason I felt my life should be about the poor. And so one day I read in my rough guide to India that the slums of the old city were behind the Charminar, this Arc de Triomphe of southern India. And so I went looking there, perhaps with a hunch about what I might find. And there, down one back street, down one alleyway, I found a school, a private school, in those days charging about $1 US a month. Then I found another, and soon I was part of a meeting with a federation of 500 of these low-cost private schools. I talked to parents. I met mostly mothers, mostly Muslim mothers in the old city of Hyderabad. I said, well, why are you sending your children to private school? You have to pay a couple of dollars a month. The government school is free. The government school, you get free lunch, maybe free books. And mother after mother told me, the teachers don't turn up in the government schools. The teachers, if they do turn up, they don't teach, but get our children to do chores. Or in the government school, our children are abandoned. So I went to see one of the government schools. It was a very nice building, I went with the district education officer, and he was remarkably candid to me. He said, today, James, there are just 2 teachers present in the school. There should be 7, but there are just 2 today. Every day, there are just 2 teachers. I went into a classroom with 130 kids, bright-eyed, sitting on the floor amongst the mosquitoes, doing nothing. So pleased to see a stranger come and greet them, but doing nothing, and I saw what those mothers were saying about the abandonment of these children, waiting, and contrast that with what was happening in the private schools. So I went back to Washington, D.C. I was doing consultancy for the International Finance Corporation, the private arm of the World Bank. I went back to Washington, D.C. really animated. I said, look, there's something amazing going on in the slums in Hyderabad. People said, calm down, Tooley. Calm down, dear. You've seen maybe 1 or 2 businessmen ripping off the poor. I thought, businessmen ripping off the poor? I've seen people running sports days and science fairs on their weekends. How can that be the case? So I managed to get funding from the John Templeton Foundation. I was determined to see what was going on, and went to places like Makoko, this shantytown built on stilts into the dark waters of the Lagos Lagoon. We went looking there, driving over the bridge here, looking down, asked my guide. He said, it's too dangerous to go there, you can't go there. So the next day, I took my colleague down there, and we went down there.
Probably all right, isn't it? And then coming here.
Yes, and they trade with French territory.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Hi.
What's the meaning?
Kennedy what?
Kennedy Private School.
Kennedy Private School.
Yeah.
Just the school. So going into that shanty town on canoes, finding children, asking that little girl Sandra, where does she go to school? KPS, she says. What does KPS mean? Kennedy. Kennedy what? Kennedy Private School. And there it was, not Kennedy like the American president, but Kennedy, a Nigerian word, one of 32 low-cost private schools in that shanty town alone. We went to Nairobi, to Kibera, one of the most notorious slums in Africa, in fact. And in the days before we started this work, see Frank there, where does he go to school? People would assume a government school or he's out of school, but in actual fact, follow him into the slum there, and you'll find he too is at a low-cost private school, one of nearly 100 in the slums. And even in remote rural China, I thought I'd met my nemesis here. I went there looking for low-cost private schools. I went with one of my doctoral students there, Liu Chang, now a professor at Beijing Normal University. We went asking people. We had to abandon a car. We went into the mountains of Gansu province, traveling for 2 days. And at the very end of this, seeing people harvesting as they'd done for hundreds of years through narrow gorges, we found our low-cost private school. 1 of 586 low-cost private schools in those remote mountains of Gansu province in China. Here's some numbers for you then. We've done surveys, household surveys, surveys of schools. How many children are in these private schools? In the urban areas, it's quite extraordinary. This is a recent household survey from Lagos State. Fully 70% of the children aged 5 to 14 are in private schools. A great success story in Lagos State, but in government schools, just 26% of children there. And a lot of these schools are unregistered, so people assume the children are out of school. No, they're in low-cost private schools, and they're learning better than in the government schools. Even in rural areas. These are figures from rural India. If you look at the bottom figure there, there's all India. 28% of rural villages in India have a private school, but they increase dramatically depending on the state, going all the way up to Haryana, Punjab, which are well over 50% of children there in private schools. And there, if you test the children, we've tested so many children, 35,000 children now in different subjects, and you find the same picture. The children, the blue, the government school marks, the yellow, the low-cost private schools. The children in the private schools do so much better than the children in the government schools. So it's all a tremendous success story, a tremendous thing to celebrate. And I've been celebrating this for the last 15 years, really, since I discovered it. It's been my life's work. I wrote a book about it, The Beautiful Tree. You can download it on your Kindle, I'm sure, in the interval. But when I wrote that book, I got the criticism. Okay, you've been talking about Kenya, you've been talking about Ghana, India. These are not the poorest people. Are you serious? You're talking about how the world's poor are educating themselves. That's not really the poorest people. So I took this criticism seriously and got more funding to look at this in the world's most extreme places, in conflict and post-conflict states in Africa, South Sudan, Somalia, Sierra Leone. These are children of stonebreakers just outside Freetown. And Liberia. We did studies in the 5 slums of Monrovia, some of the poorest slums in the world. One of them is called West Point. You probably saw that slum on your TVs recently. The government shut it off to try and contain the Ebola in that very crowded community. Another one's called Chicken Soup Factory. I'm sure you can guess why it's called Chicken Soup Factory. And there's one called Red Light. Now, you'd be wrong if you thought you could guess why that's called Red Light. It's named after the only functioning traffic light in Monrovia. There we find again, we've done household surveys, again that extraordinary number, a number bigger than 70%, 71% of children aged 5 to 14 years in some of the poorest slums in the world are in low-cost private schools. This is quite extraordinary, and if you look at those schools, well over 60% of those schools are provided by proprietors, could call them for-profit, run by a man or woman or a couple, not run by churches or mosques or NGOs. So this is really a private enterprise initiative that's serving the poor. Now this slide here is to show you that I've been busy with numbers. I really don't want you to read it, but I have been busy, but it shows some of the multi-level modeling we've been doing, comparing how the children are doing in these schools. And you can see these predicted scores for their reading. If you come closest to me, the government school children are the worst. Right next to the government school children, you've got those children in government-assisted private schools. And then at the far end, outperforming those children with predicted scores, you've got the children in the low-cost private schools. As I say, it's something to really celebrate, but why are parents able to afford these schools? Well, that's interesting, because of course they charge fees. This is from Doe Community in the slums of Monrovia, Liberia. And if you look at the fees, yes, the fees in the private schools, far away from me over here, are or closest to me, this side, of course. The fees are 3 times higher than in the government schools. Private schools are more expensive, but government schools are not free. You've got to provide uniform, you've got to get books, you've got to do transport, and all these extra things. And when you put those into the mix, you find those columns in the middle there, where the cost to parents of the extras is roughly the same in private and government schools. Add them together, and you get this extraordinary figure that in these slums in Monrovia, the cost of sending a child to government school is 75% of the cost of sending a child to private school. So these schools are better, and they're nearly as affordable to parents as the government schools. I've been doing this work, as I say, for 15 years, but a few years back, people were saying to me, okay, you're saying the private schools, people in the private schools were saying, these private schools, you're saying we're better than the government schools. But that's a very low bar to set us. It's a very low bar. So can we improve more? And I've been trying various ways of working together with schools, creating schools, trying to see how we can raise the standards even further. One was with my Ghanaian companion, Ken Donko, a brilliant Ghanaian entrepreneur. We created Omega Schools. In 4 years, we grew to nearly 40 schools with 20,000 children, and trying to show how a for-profit model could raise millions of dollars investment and improve educational standards. In Sierra Leone, we started something similar, Alpha Schools. And unfortunately, of course, the Ebola crisis came and our schools were closed for some time, but nonetheless, we were at least able to get started there. And both Omega and Alpha have an all-inclusive daily fee model based on the idea that the cash flow of the poor is daily. So if you want to serve the poor, fit in with what your clients can afford. And finally, I've been working with federations. There's one in Nigeria, a very Nigerian name, AFID, the Association of Formidable Education Development. I'm the one in the middle, if you can't spot me. We've got 3,000 private schools, 600,000 students, and we are working to raise standards, but also to fight government. Because government often sees these schools as a problem. And in Nigeria, but in India in particular, there's new legislation which is condemning these private schools to closure. And in Punjab, where I was speaking to the Punjab Private School Organization recently, 3,000 of these private schools, with probably 500,000 or 600,000 students in them, have been closed by government because they don't meet some arbitrary standards. But remember, poor parents have chosen those schools. Poor parents have chosen those schools because they say they are better than the government schools. What I've been showing you today is that they are better. Their instincts are correct. Those schools are delivering better outcomes. And it's a crying shame when government comes along and starts closing schools that parents have chosen as a matter of preference over schools they're now consigned to. I was saying those sort of things and worse as I unveiled my Sikh ceremonial dagger. And one day I might tell an audience like this of some of the problems you get into when you talk like that about governments in foreign parts. But let's go back to Malala. Remember, when you hear Malala's story again, Malala, she didn't go to what you expect she went to. She wasn't shot on her way to a government school. She attended a private school, and her story is not alone. There's this grassroots revolution sweeping the developing world. I'm really pleased to be telling you about it today. Thank you.
Let's go, Pastor.